I could see you as a teenager being the kind of guy that likes to come up with his own nicknames and throw them out there in school and at practice, trying to get people to call you that.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What? Might be the most insulting thing you've ever said to me.
I'm going to be spending a lot more time in here with you lot because I love it in here. I fucking love it!
You know, I am very, very proud of us because this is yet another week where the intro has gone off without a hitch. Though I will say we're not recording live, so it's not like that really matters.
I like the countdown to live. Yeah, it's great.
It doesn't really matter. I guess we could totally fuck it up and just redo it and no one would know. But this is the second week in a row, Jason, that you are not wearing your pirate sweater.
I just realized that right when I was getting ready to get my setup done, and I was like trying to come up with a witty retort for you, but I got nothing. I literally, I was gonna have an excuse, but I remember even when I went to get dressed this morning, and I am in beautiful downtown, cold, rainy Chicago, and I was like, should I wear my pirate sweater today? I was like, nah, I'm gonna wear my wool jacket, and I wasn't even thinking about the show.
Wasn't even thinking about the show. Well, folks, I don't want you to take that as an insult to all of you who are spending your valuable time listening. This show does matter quite a bit to us. What is this show? Well, you're tuned into the Pirates of Finance. We are your co-hosts. That incredibly handsome, brilliant mind across the mic from me is the one and only young Hemingway, Jason Buck. I am his foil. The man who tries to keep up intellectually but constantly stumbles through this podcast. I am Corey Hoffstein. This is the podcast about all things markets, economics, business, entrepreneurship, art, sometimes clothing every once in a while. Really random stuff a lot of the times, but it's definitely not advice of any kind. If you're looking for advice, go somewhere else, seek professional help. Jason, this bull market rally getting a little long in the tooth. I've got a new sentiment indicator.
Yep. What's that?
But I don't want anyone listening to chirp me on this one because I feel like I don't want to take the heat on Twitter. But it's Keith McCullough from Hedge. The angrier he tweets about how the rest of the world is wrong, it feels like a really strong sentiment indicator to me about some macro positioning. This is not a knock on Hedge. I don't know their products. I don't know how they're positioned. What I do know is he's starting to get a lot of people on Twitter saying to him, hey, Keith, seems like you're off sides. Hey, Keith, seems like this bull market keeps running and you keep calling it a coming recession. What gives? And his responses seem to be getting a little meaner and meaner.
Shocking, Corey. Say it ain't so. But is that because, like, you know, to use their parlance, their quad 4 or quad 1 is like they have us in quad 4 when I'm sure everybody on Twitter's arguing we're in quad 1, but isn't always a trend following a lagging indicator? So he's always going to be semi offsides at any turn, right?
So I can only tell you what my perception of the Hedge process is, and it might be wrong, right? So if you know the Hedge process and I speak incorrectly here, please find some way to correct us. But my understanding is they use a large number of macroeconomic variables, and they are looking at the rate of change of those variables to try to figure out where the market is moving into. And then what they have is a historical back test for a large number of asset classes, currencies, commodities, equities, different equity style tilts, factors, all sorts of stuff that they then say for that particular quad, these are the asset classes you would want to be long, and these are the ones you'd want to be short. But I do know Keith, at least my understanding is Keith's a very active trader, right? He can say this is my general framework, but then be in and out of things based on their different risk ranges intro week. So it's incredibly hard to say this is the track record. People have tried, and I don't think anyone has successfully been able to nail down what the track record of Hedge is. I do know lots of people find the process incredibly useful as a framework to them. So again, I've never dug in. I'm not going to judge something I don't understand. What I do know is Keith is very active on Twitter, and he's very angry right now, it seems.
Well, I think there's so many things in there. One, very active on Twitter means that I'm not likely to follow somebody because I like to keep my Twitter feed clean. You're probably the most active person I follow on Twitter, which is just way too much for me in the first place.
I just assumed you muted me.
Well, I've also barely look at Twitter either. But to your point, yeah, it's rate of change. And then what's interesting, like you said, is like I've always asked, like basically everybody, and this is no shade on their thing, is like everybody that follows Hedge or participates with Hedge all has different P&Ls. So that's what I'm saying. There is no track record. And then to your fairness, like it's also rate of change over multiple time window analysis. And Keith will trade even shorter time windows, and then they have their longer time frames to like for their quad models. But like on it, they like you said, some might be trading intraday, some might be trading weekly, some might be trading monthly. And so like putting it all together is a bit nebulous, and everybody's going to have, I think, different positions and P&L, even if they're an avid follower of Hedge.
All I know is that you will not catch me as a mid-30s man calling another man coach unironically. I cannot believe the number of people who go around calling him coach. When they're like, okay, you want to know what? If you play sports, you can call someone coach. If you want to say it ironically as a nickname, you want to call someone coach for some reason. Maybe they're being paternalistic asshole to you. Fine. Like, you can call him coach. But to actually call someone coach unironically.
Is it because is this whole hockey thing, and like is that part of the shtick? That's where the coach comes from. It's got to be, right? Because he was a hockey player at like Yale, right? And he's from Ontario, right, or something.
Yeah, he's a big hockey guy. What I want to know is, did he give himself the nickname coach, or did someone else start calling him coach? Because I guess it's kind of okay, like if subscribers started calling him coach and it came organically, but if you try to impose that nickname upon yourself, I don't know. I got to give them a lot of credit. I don't like it, but the marketing they do...
The marketing is unreal.
I mean, I don't like antagonistic marketing, but marketing 101 is you choose a them and you say us versus them. To call CNBC old wall, to talk
old
about
wall. I was like,
moving monkeys for moving averages and dismissively talking about... I mean, he was abusive to Josh Brown when Josh Brown was on Twitter. He just comes up with horrific nicknames for people on CNBC and screenshots them. And it works for some people. I just find that type of marketing incredibly off-putting, but I know that kind of marketing objectively works.
Yeah, but I also give golf clap for creativity, because I wish I was that creative sometimes with coming up with all those names and like all those insider jokes. Like even with Booty Crew, we'd be much better off if we could come up with those. But it does remind me, I could see you as a teenager being the kind of guy that like likes to come up with his own nicknames and throw them out there in school and at practice, trying to get people to call you that.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What? Might be the most insulting thing you've ever said to me. I actually don't think I ever had a nickname. I'm trying to think. Did you have one? I don't think I ever had a nickname.
Hoff. The Hoff is just
no one actually ever called me the Hoff, which you would think that was like low-hanging fruit. I think it was too easy. No, I never had a nickname. What about you? You're a big sports guy.
I'm sure I did. I mean, Buck obviously rhymes with a lot of great words, so you can imagine. But yeah, I don't think so really either. I'm gonna transition this a little bit. So I'm at the RCM World Headquarters in Chicago, Illinois. Shout out to RCM for letting me use one of their offices today to record this pod. But more importantly, I just had a meeting earlier today. I want to give a shout out to your homie and my homie, Brian Moriarty, the Dungeon Master. Gave me a tour of Morningstar. Speaking of nicknames. Okay. Should we clarify what that nickname comes from?
You need to clarify what that... You can't just
the
go around
Dungeon
calling
Master does
people
not
the
come from
Dungeon
Brian.
Master.
The Dungeon Master does not come from Brian's personal proclivities. It comes from the Dungeons and Dragons game that Corey and our homies at Resolve and everybody else are a part of. So Brian is the Dungeon Master of their D&D game for their nerd herd.
You know what's crazy? Nerd herd, great phrase. We have been playing pretty much weekly since November 2019. Which is kind of crazy. Like this game just, I mean, we've had entire campaigns. We've had, I guess, 2 now, technically full campaigns, where we just started our 3rd. But yeah, somehow, I mean, during the pandemic, it was fantastic. Post-pandemic, I have to explain to my wife that I can't go on date night with her because I have to go sit in front of a computer and play Imaginations with my friends.
You know what's funny is like I told Brian I was going to mention it on the show today, and I was like, you can't, like, he's giving me a tour of Morningstar, and as you would imagine, like security, all those sorts of things, and I'm just like, there is no way you're ever going to get like our show pass compliance at like a Morningstar. And he said he was trying to send like clips or snippets of things we've mentioned on the show to like some of his coworkers, and I'm like, you have to categorize that with like NSFW, and that, like, you got to use your personal emails. You can't use company emails for the show.
Absolutely. And that's why this show will never take off, because we do our best to make sure that it cannot be shared among our corporate friends. All right, can I take us into a markets thing a little bit? No, okay.
No. Before you get there, I told you I have several bones to pick with you, but the first one is back in, was it September, October? You guys had a real world Dungeons and Dragons meetup. Where was that meetup at? Not to dox anybody, but I think you may have told me you had a trip to Chicago, but that wasn't quite accurate, was it?
Did I fly into Chicago?
Yes.
Yes.
You don't need to
say
exactly
I know where I was going after that when I got into a car and someone drove me to a cabin? I did not.
Somebody drove me to a cabin.
This isn't on me.
So you know that I grew up near Kalamazoo, Michigan. Luckily, when I was 15, I moved to the warmer confines of Florida, and I've never lived in winter since because I wanted to escape that place. But like we talked about last week in Detroit, and now I'm in Chicago. So eventually, maybe come in the next show, I'll give my impressions of Chicago after giving my impressions of Detroit. But in between, we went to Michigan wine country in Southwest Michigan along the Michigan Lake Shore around New Buffalo, Michigan. And there was actually shout out Stranger Wine Co. Max and Sydney are making some unbelievable wines there. Like, he had trained in Oregon, Washington, California, and he was making, like, I would blind taste them against any wines, so like the Jura in France. Like, they're just unbelievable wines. But that was one of the things that came up with Brian and I today. We started talking about wines. We started talking about New Buffalo, and that's allegedly around that general vicinity is where you guys had your in-person meetup for D&D.
You say all that to me as if any of that rings a bell. No. I'm sorry. I was not in a physical location. I was captivated by the fairy tale make-believe game we were playing in whatever cabin we were in. I was escaping to a faraway realm, Jason. You can't blame me for not knowing where in the physical world I was.
Oh my God, this is modern Corey. Like, screw the real world. Just give me my goggles. So did you actually end up going to the Lakeshore at all while you were there? Do you remember?
Yeah.
Speaking of enchanted realm, it's shocking how much it looks like an ocean and like the sand dunes and the beaches. It's crazy, isn't it?
Blew me away. So I guess that's Lake Michigan, technically.
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah. Yep. Enormous. I mean, that was my first time there. I don't think I fully grasped how big the Great Lakes are. I mean, it really looks like an ocean. It really does. And I now get the appeal of everyone who has a cabin in those regions. I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's primarily Chicagoans, but I think it's somewhere in between. To me, it's somewhere between the East Coast and West Coast, because it has more grandeur than the East Coast, so it's not quite as big as the West Coast. But like, some of those sand dunes are really large, and then, like you said, you're looking out at what you would perceive as an ocean, and it's really shocking for people the first time. It was great showing my girlfriend all that area for the first time. But then also, what excited me is that it was great to be on trains again. Right, I took a train from New Buffalo to Chicago, direct, no stops, like an hour 20 minutes, $12, right into the heart of Union Station in Chicago. And then able to jump on the L from there. It's just great to be on trains again.
I was having this conversation. I was actually up in Philadelphia this weekend. I had to take a day trip. What was intended to be a day trip on Saturday that ended up being an unintentional overnight trip. But I was having this conversation with someone else who was taking the train out of Philly, and I was saying, I actually kind of miss the Amtrak from Boston to New York. I took that all the time, and I would do it on day trips. And there was no better feeling than going to the food cart, getting a Dogfish Head on the way home from a trip to New York, walking around the train in a suit, drinking a beer. I don't know. I just felt like James Bond. I think it's great. I love trains. Though I don't know if you've ever done one of those more scenic trains. I took one of these trains in Alaska where it's like got a glass top and you're sitting there and it's like, oh,
yes,
you get to
I want to take that train. Yeah.
Your nice tea and you watch the beautiful vista. Like, I would love to do one of those trains out in the Midwest. Those are supposed to be phenomenal tourism trains.
Yeah, and the Coastal Starlight that goes up and down the West Coast is amazing too. It has that double decker with like the glass roof, and you could take it all the way from San Diego up to Seattle. So like, yeah, there's still some great trains in the U.S. And then we talked about your great state of Florida has the Brightline train, which is probably the most exciting train system in America right now. But you brought up would James Bond be drinking a Dogfish Head?
James Bond drinks whatever James Bond wants to drink. I just want to say I can tell how well we're doing within the show based on Tyler's behind the scenes face. We got to get on track here, bud. We started this every time I'm like, this is the Pirates of Finance. I'm like, and then we're going to spend 20 minutes talking about Dungeons and Dragons and trains. Like, don't even get me into like train modeling, Jason. That's where this could go.
No, nobody. Come on. Nobody's here for finance. That's not what we talk. It's not finance. This is not a finance show. And more importantly, speaking
it's
of
ironically named.
I was sending you photos last night of the cocktail menu at Lazy Bird inside the Hoxton Hotel in Chicago. Phenomenal classical cocktail menu. Was explaining where the Hemingway daiquiri comes from to Jeff Malik because both of us have gout, so we should have been ordering those, but we weren't. No. We were going for the rum drinks, and trying to add some sugar to it. Why not? It's delicious.
Sometimes you just got to do it. You suffer the pain later. I
was drinking. You could transition us if you want.
Some pretty strong rum punches on Saturday. A friend of mine's mother passed away, and the mother owned a bar and had a strong penchant for rum punches. And so the memorial, there was a decent amount of drinking of rum punches. Hence why I did not make my flight that night and had to rebook for the next morning. All right, so let me transition.
Jeff, before you do, I'm going to still derail us again. Speaking of trains, this is derailing us. Jeff was asking us, we've talked about doing the rum bar potentially near where you called home. But he's like, who's going to run your guys' rum bar and make sure you keep that vault of aged rums, safe? And I'm like, that's a great question. We need to find.
I'm just going to sneak in. I'm just going to sneak in and drink it myself, and then say to you, I don't know what happened to our assets. I'm going to need it.
It's by appointment only.
Yeah, and you have to go with me. All right, a little bit of a transition. So I have been one of the things I try to do proactively as much as I can, and I might regret saying this out loud, is when a younger quant reaches out to me on email or Twitter DM asking to have a call, I really do try my best to find time to meet with them. I try to, I don't want to say give back because that implies I have something to give. I don't know why they think I'm worth talking to. But a lot of times they're young and they're asking for career advice, of which, again, I can't offer any. But I'm happy to, answer their questions to the best of my ability. And this is going two directions. One, I saw a tweet from, I'm gonna butcher his name and I apologize. I think it's Kai He, I think is his name. And he was talking about how he has an approach to this, which is he will not do live calls with anyone who asks for his time. But if they will send him a list of questions, he will record a Zoom or a Loom video.
Loom, yeah.
And send it back to them. And he said, if just in doing that, he screens out like 80% of people who won't just send him a list of questions. And I thought that was really interesting because I'm of the view that if you're going to ask someone for their time, you better have an agenda. Like there's nothing worse than someone asks me for my time and I give them my time and they just like they sort of hem and haw. Like they didn't know what to do once they got on the phone. And I get it. Like maybe you have this perception of whatever that like you're nervous to talk to whoever you're talking to, but you know, coming prepared is a big part of the game. So I thought that was a really interesting approach. I'm not sure I want to take it necessarily, but often with a lot of these younger quants that I talk to, I say, look, like I'll have the first call. After that, like email me. You have my email now. Just email me and I promise I will not ignore it. I will do my best to get back to you. And if it deserves a call, we'll have a call. But like it takes a lot out of my day. I only have so many hours in the day. Like you asking for an hour call, I can only do this so many times. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Like I'll also go another direction, more finance related, because something came up on the call, but I want to get your thoughts on like giving back to younger people who are looking to network, best way to do that, respecting your own time, but also respect, like we were all in that position once when we were young.
Oh, this is a tough one. By the way, I was thinking the Booty Crew, if you want on Corey's Twitter now to just, his new nickname is the Mentor, not the coach. Maybe it's Coach, but maybe it's Quant Mentor, the Quant Father.
Oh, God.
Trying to think of good nicknames for you that we could use on Twitter. Yeah, there's so many things in there. I think, you know, one of the books I'd recommended you in the past was that Mark Echo book, and he used to do swag bombs to get people's attention and like send them all kinds of stuff. And then I think other people have said what they call like lumpy mail, like when they send a letter in the mail, they'll put like a pen or a figurine in there because it always gets opened, you know, or if you overnight something, somebody will open it. So it's nice if people have much more creativity to get your attention, because like, right, it's not a heavy lift to just send you a DM on Twitter.
Yeah, but I don't want people sending me anything.
Well, no, I know.
Right?
I'm just what I'm getting to is like you said, to like, it's nice to be respectful and then respect your time. And so maybe part of that is like have your bullet point questions, but also not be questions that like you answer all the time, like on Twitter or on podcasts or everything too. That's the other thing. But maybe they're just like nervous and want to ask you a question. What I always find fascinating about it too is that one, stop calling us sir, because neither of us are a sir. You know, dear sir.
I love when I get Mr. Hofstein, and I do the classic. Mr. Hofstein was my father.
It's just like so weird. But then the other one that it's just your nice personality. The other one that trips me up is when they're wanting some sort of like advice or anything. And at 25, they're way more accomplished than I am at 45. And I'm like, what kind of advice am I going to give you? You're already way ahead 100%. Of me. And I'm 20 100%. Years ahead of you. It's like,
and what makes you think my advice is any good? Like, you know, recognize if you read anything that I've ever written, it's all about the randomness of life. Like maybe I just got completely lucky to end up where.
But also, related to what you did, I also just went through. I hate LinkedIn, and I think I just looked at my LinkedIn, and so I had a lot of these like you're talking about. But like, but it was like I think this is the first time I've even looked at LinkedIn this year, halfway through the year. So I was kind of like sifting through all those, and I was like, yeah, here's my email, just hit me up, whatever. But like you said, I just like I try to answer a lot of those questions, and I think what you're referring to actually just popped in my mind. Didn't somebody say that like they reached out to you years ago, whatever, and you really went out of your way to help them, and it was like how much they appreciated? I thought people were saying almost in the comments there that like on Twitter, I think I saw that you really helped them, and you have. I've seen you do it millions of times, and you're probably much better than I am. But like to your point is like if somebody takes the time to reach out to you, like it behooves us to respond. All of it. Man, this whole entire conversation just sounds so douchey to me, but.
No, but look, when I was in their position, networking is important. Learning from people in the industry is important. And sometimes you're just trying to like network your way in the door. It is a little weird, like when you're younger and you have these people whose either work you've been reading or for whatever reason, like you see them as being older, more senior members of the community. It can be intimidating to reach out to them. The one thing I always say is like, if my DMs are open, DM me. Like if this show has taught you anything, I am not like, right. I'm not normal by any means, but like I'm not anyone to be intimidated by. That's for sure. And so I always say to these folks, like, look, to me, networking is a huge part of the game. No matter what part of the industry you're in, you don't have to be in sales, but your life is sales. You're always advocating for yourself. Like, be active on Twitter. talk to people in DMs. Like there's fascinating conversations that happen in DMs, and you never know who you'll build a relationship with over time, or who will start to recognize your name even if you haven't interacted with them because of things like Twitter. And I guess some people do it on LinkedIn. I don't understand LinkedIn at all. But again, I always find this like hard balance of I want to give my time, but sometimes I just want them to be better. You know, I'm like, if you're going to ask for my time, you know,
part of that is like the flip side of what you're saying. The hard part is, yes, network, reach out, all those sorts of things. But at the same time, we live in a world where it's so easy to reach out. Like when we were coming up, it wasn't so easy to contact like anybody. And as much as I joke, well, I'm not joking, how much I dislike Twitter, is like Twitter has been unbelievable for the DMs for us to build networks with other people within our community. So you and I have used it liberally to build those contacts. But then even more importantly, I think the real key, and we have a perfect example here with our homie Tyler behind the scenes here. He showed and demonstrated like work and aptitude and how much he had already followed. Like it was very detailed. And he's like, hey, I did this, this, and this for you guys. And like just kept putting out content that showed his work. And so more than anything, it's like show your learning in public. And that's the best way to network.
Right.
More importantly, game recognizes game. Like if Corey and I see you and you're in our DMs and then we go to like your profile and it shows you're learning in public, you're trying, or like your question is like, hey, I tried this, this, and this. I know you talk about this, this, and this. Here's my specific question. Like that is unbelievably valuable. That's going to get our attention.
Yes. There's a balance to that though. Cause I've had some people like ask me, not homework questions, but stuff that I'm like, I can't spend all day
right
like explaining stuff to you in the DMs. Like if I'm like the answer's in this book or the answer's in this paper, like, okay, if you demonstrate to me you went and read it and you still have a follow-up question, fine. But like there's a certain amount of you got to go do your own legwork at a certain point. Like as resources, we're not here to be your encyclopedias necessarily. But yeah, I 100% agree. If someone can demonstrate they're learning in public and they're trying and they're interacting and they have a thoughtful question, I'm excited to talk to that person.
Yeah, because the problem a lot of times asking questions is a proxy for doing the work. Right. Yeah. And execution is everything. So if you see somebody trying and actually doing the work, then that makes you want to help them out. And so I think that's what a lot of people miss. We're just asking a question is not doing the work.
So I will also say though, and this is like a Twitter etiquette thing, do not tag. Don't write something and then tag 50 people. And I feel bad. So
that's a great public service. Yeah.
Nomadic Samuel. I don't want to call him out for this, but I think he and I got off on the wrong foot. He is someone who I think has really done a cool job trying to learn in public. Yep. This is just someone who's passionate about investing. He does a blog where he writes all about his learnings and how he's thinking about building portfolios, and he interacts with tons of people on Twitter. Early on, he'd do something and then he'd tag like 20 of us in the tweet. And I finally sent him a message and I said, I don't know where you learned to do that. I think that's like a growth hacking 101 back in the early 2010s thing. But there is nothing more off-putting than just getting mass tagged in something. Because it shows you didn't like, it's just sort of like trying to jump to the front of the line of my attention. And it's a really negative thing. I think he got a little mad at me and I said, it's not that I don't want to see what you're doing. It's that I don't want to get mass tagged and stuff all the time, because then my feed becomes useless, because then my notifications are just people who are like, hey, did you see what I did? Hey, did you see what I did? Rather than actual organic conversation.
Yeah, and I think I know Sam pretty well too, and I think he generally appreciated that, and he course corrected, right? He's probably more thankful that you said that than anything, and it was kind of you to actually reach out and say that, because it's easier to talk shit behind somebody's back than it is to like call them, like tell them like how you feel.
Because I knew the intention was right. It was just one of those like, hey, if you're new to Twitter, you're not going to understand. Like, you don't actually do this. It's the same thing with Twitter, like with hashtags. When I see people use hashtags unironically, I'm like, you really don't understand social media. Like Twitter has moved on from hashtags a decade ago. In fact, if you looked at that most recent like Twitter algorithm code that came out, using a hashtag meant that your tweet was going to get seen less. They literally programmed that into the scoring system, that hashtags meant you got your less views. So you're
saying people should use hashtag quant mentor for Corey Hoffstein?
Quant mentor for sure.
But
For sure.
by the way, Tyler behind the scenes, like, listen to these boomers trying to talk about social media and they have no clue what they're talking about.
Yeah, don't ask me about TikTok because I can't figure that out. That's Tyler. Look, this is
We're
where
like 21 Jump Street. What up, kids?
Where I wanted to go with this is in one of these conversations on this call. This young guy asked me about something about the VIX. And I said, look, let me just full stop. You're asking something about like the VIX. Can you actually explain to me what the VIX is? Right. And I didn't want to put him on the spot and embarrass him, but I was like, I want to make a point here. Like, explain to me what the VIX is. Explain to me how it's calculated and explain to me what it actually means. And he couldn't. And my point was simply that if you can't explain this stuff, you shouldn't be talking about it. And I saw it. Macrocephalopod on Twitter had a great tweet where he was calling out Zero Hedge. Zero Hedge yesterday had a tweet where they were showing the one-day VIX, and it was like a straight line up all day yesterday. And Zero Hedge was saying, look at these evil zero DTE options driving VIX higher. And Macrocephalopod was like, well, actually, the way one-day VIX is calculated is it's a linear interpolation between zero DTE and one DTE. And guess what, fuckle nuts? One DTE is a CPI day. Like, maybe there's a lot of event risk built in. And so as you get from today towards tomorrow, of course, one-day VIX goes up because you have a bunch of event risk priced in the options. So long story short, I then just said, like, I retweeted that and I said, yes, Macrocephalopod. All of that to say that Zero Hedge has absolutely no fucking idea what they are talking about as per usual. Absolutely. Zero Hedge. I don't know if they ever had it, but they certainly don't have it anymore. But the long story short here, is like, you see this a lot of times, and I know you and I absolutely just hate on macro people, but I find this is the case more often than not with macro tourists, that they can sort of pontificate about this stuff without having any understanding. Oh, VIX gets crushed every Friday and it's someone's manipulating the market. No, it's just fucking how VIX is calculated. And when you get towards Friday, it means the forward measurement period has more weekends than weekdays or versus midweek. Like, there are very mechanical reasons some of this stuff happens, all of which is priced into the futures and options themselves. And if you don't understand that, you can get misled into believing it's fantasy stories, like my Dungeons and Dragons game. But it's not. This is the real world, Jason.
It was also a nice callback to variance time last week when we were talking about Chris Abdulmasih, right? And like, how do you calculate weekends into your variance metrics? So it's a great point. And you also reminded me that your Flirting with Models podcast with Macrocephalopod is still on my queue. I still haven't listened to it. I'm very excited. It's like number one on my queue. I just haven't gotten to it. And that pisses me off that I haven't listened to it yet.
Well, here's the great thing about the podcast.
It's permanent.
It's permanent. Actually, it's not. It's not, as it turns out. I don't know how I want to say this. I did have someone ask me to take down their old episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it wasn't for like, they didn't want it out there because they said something wrong or whatever, or they were embarrassed about the episode. It was a personal security thing.
By the way, for you, how do you think about like podcasts you did maybe 7 or 8 years ago? Like, how embarrassing would that be if you went back and listened to it, like, as you've grown as a person? And
I was always, I think I was a podcasting, what's the word I want to use? Protege. I think I was a podcasting genius from the get-go. So, I don't.
You've always lived in the future.
I don't think I'd be embarrassed by the original podcast. I think they're all exceptional. I don't know. I don't listen to my own podcasts. I hope they're still good. I try to make them evergreen. Like, I would hope if you went back and listened to season 2, the interviews I had back then are still, the lessons there are timeless. Though there are some interesting ones, right? So I had a conversation with Eric Irvin about dividend swaps, and then that was pre-March 2020, and the dividend swaps market absolutely blew up March 2020, and the product that he was running, that was a dividend swaps ETF, didn't survive. I had an interview with Alex Trabucco, right? We talked about that on the past. Like, what's my responsibility as a podcast host? I have no idea where he is in the world, but there seemed to have been some not so great stuff happening at Alameda, and who knows? Maybe I just got taken for a ride in giving him an interview. But I think that's going to sneak by every once in a while.
So I'm glad you transitioned to podcast because this week I listened to you and Rodrigo on Meb Faber's podcast. Great to see you guys out there. But also Brian Moriarty and I were joking earlier when I was at his offices about your we've talked about many times. You're like, do people not see my humor? And I'm like, no, everybody thinks you're so serious all the time. And so I want to shout out on Meb's pod. Meb tried to keep you thrown off your track, and you'd go, well, back to return stacking, and you'd go into like your spiel, and then a little pre-shout out to a pre-recorded or previously recorded episode of The Derivative with Jeff Malik. And when you're in the middle of the pod, you had a pirate intrusion in the background, and you said you didn't skip a beat. You laughed and then went right back to what you were talking about.
I did try. You did walk through the background in full pirate garb while I was mid-podcast. Yeah, look, I'm sorry I take my job seriously. Sorry. I don't know what to say to you.
Well, I felt like Meb was trying to throw you off a little bit, and you weren't having it. But I did like he was like, I don't know how Corey's not worth hundreds of millions. You're like, I like the backhanded compliment there that I'm an idiot that should be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And somehow I fucked my life up that it just didn't happen. And then, like I said, macrocephalopod on flirting with models is in my queue, but unfortunately I jumped a little bit forward because I also wanted to hear our homie Jason Josephiak that was on flirting with models as well. So I kind of skipped ahead and now I need to go back. But one of the things I was thinking about is Jason's at Makita, and at Makita they use the acronym RMS for risk mitigation strategies for a lot of like long ball, tail risk, commodity trend advisors, that sort of thing, or even maybe some orthogonal strategies that they call diversifiers. But what I was thinking about listening to that is like, how do you think about naming, right? Like RMS, risk mitigation strategies, all this stuff. Like I reached out to Rodrigo, and I will remind everybody it was Rodrigo's idea, not yours, to call it return stacking, which is a brilliant naming convention. But like RMS, like these 3-letter acronyms, I can't stand.
Yeah, marketing is important. Is RMS? Yeah, marketing is important. Does someone write that down? Get out your notebook, write that down. Is RMS the best possible thing? Like risk mitigating strategies, is that the best thing to call it? I don't know. You could probably come up with something far more clever. But on the other hand, I've also heard of firms that'll name their strategy like, this is the crystal strategy. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Like, it's just a multi-alternative fund of funds. Like, why is it called crystal? Or like, so there's all sorts of names out there that are mostly meaningless. So they went with a name that's very explicit. I can't blame them. I'm not sure everything has to be catchy, and like it's better if you can pull that off, but I don't know. That's not always feasible.
I mean, I've heard there's like some D-bags will name their funds like after insects and stuff like that. So you just never know what people are doing. And so, but what I think it's a function of like the real money player, like the institutions, right? The endowments and pensions, they love a good acronym. So that's where I think it more comes out of like the consultants to like the pensions and endowments. They're just laden with acronyms, and they probably use that as moats for people not to know what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, look, let's recognize that there's a certain aspect of this industry that like you have to be buttoned up for, right?
Right.
You get anyone out at the bar for the most part, and everyone's just a human being, or at coffee, like a one-on-one, people are human beings. But we put on this like idea of we have to be buttoned up and have the suit and tie on, or power suit, and like, so you have to be safe with the way you say things. I think I mentioned I was at the Macro Minds conference last week, and Cliff was talking about his most downloaded paper on SSRN, which is a paper about pulling the goalie early in hockey games.
Love that paper. Love it.
Well, and the paper has a clever name that is somewhat sexual about pulling the goalie. They have another paper that's like size matters if you control your junk. Well, you know, like, it's a funny title. Cliff wouldn't say the title because he's like, I think at this point I'd get canceled for saying the title. You know, times change, and people sort of sometimes are forced in the industry to maybe be a little bit more serious. So I wonder, especially as a consultant and consultants to very large corporate and public pensions, whether they have to stay on very safe territory, right, in naming the things they do.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the playing dress up that like adults have to do when you have a salary, right? But it reminded me of last night we were at the Hoxton that has in Chicago, has these great windows on Fulton Market, and it was packed on a Monday night, by the way. Two things on Monday night. One, a lot of the restaurants in Chicago aren't open on Monday night, and I was asking Zed Francis about it. He said it's a holdover from COVID. It's hard to get staffing, so most restaurants are only open 5 days now, except for like when you're down in Fulton Market, like a lot of them were open, and it was absolutely packed down there. But there's these huge windows looking out onto the streets there, and we just kept seeing like this stream of like dudes in suits. Now, you and I love a great suit. But we were talking about the distinction last night of like, you know, if you wear a suit as a dandy and you're trying to like show a little flair, and depends on where you're going and what kind of event you're at, people you're going to be around. But when you see like the faceless businessmen in like the gray or blue suit, all that signals to me is that you work for a salary and you have a boss. Like that's all that signals to me. Not that you're an adult that likes to play dress up.
Very early in my career, my business partner, who is now 50, so he's 15 years my elder, would say to me, you always know who is the client in the room because they're the most casually dressed, right? Like if you're wearing a suit and you're in the boardroom, it means you are the one doing the work. Like, and I think that's true. The further I have gotten in my career and the less I've sort of had to like play the game, quote unquote, the more outrageous my suits have gotten. Because it's like I'm dressing for me and I want to have a little flair and have some fun with this. I don't need the gray and black and blue suits anymore. Like I'm not begging for money.
So speaking of which, being the buy side, reading that Chaos Kings, a little bit more of that. Spitznagel brings up Steve Jobs quotes. We're pirates. You know, nobody wants to join the Navy. So speaking of pirates, we have a pirate's pinky promise here. You know, we don't, you know, pirates don't necessarily work for free. You know, we work for, you know, what's the, made me think of by the way, have you seen the Arnold documentary yet?
No, but I'm dying to watch it.
Yeah, but like his Conan, like to just, what's the meaning of life, whatever, to vanquish your enemies and hear the lamentations of their women. So like, pirates don't work for free. You know, pirates have rum to buy everything. So the way our pirate pinky promise works is you just have to hit that subscribe button on this YouTube channel. You know, we're out here pirating it up, you know, piloting the ship for you. All we ask for our pirate's pinky promise is for you to smash that subscribe button. So speaking of, you know, you like to dress up, you like to do your own thing, you're on the buy side. Longtime Booty Crew members are going to know, you know, your facial growth and your hair growth are out of control. So we all know what that means of like allegedly how your funds are doing. And remind me, I always call it the kitchen on your neck, but you call it what? The salad? What's the?
Oh yeah, the salad back here, the lettuce.
The lettuce is what you call it.
Wait, hold on. There is an aspect of that. There's also an aspect of with this newborn, I literally can't find time to get my hair cut. I would have a much cleaner haircut if I could. The reason I'm wearing a hat is because I've been trying to get my haircut for the last 3 weeks and can't find a time to go get my haircut. So, you know, there's a mixture here. I need a little like grace period.
So speaking of that grace period, is there anything you've noticed like where previously until you had a kid where you saw like new dads and you're like, why do they do that? I wouldn't do that. I'd keep up with this, that, and the other. And now you're like, oh, I could see why. Like this is just a whole new ball game that I hadn't imagined before. Like obviously your workouts, you're still working out, but they've become much more hit and rowing than it was, you know, full body kind of workout. So
the workout stuff, like at first I was like, well, why would anyone ever give up their physical health? And one of the things I've realized, yes, there's a time issue. Like I'm very fortunate in that I knew I wasn't going to be able to have time to drive to a gym every day. So I was able to get a rower and some weights, and I'm perfectly happy doing kettlebells and a rower. Like I'm not trying to put up massive squats and deadlifts anymore. I'm too old for that. But that said, I think the thing that really caught me off guard was how much like it's the rest and recovery, right? So I used to work out 5-6 days a week, and it was at least an hour a day, and they were pretty intense sessions. But I also slept like a baby for 8 hours a night. Now I should take that back. Babies don't sleep. So when I say sleep like a baby, I used to sleep really well. Now I sleep like a baby, which is I wake up all the fucking time. So I can't work out every day anymore because my body's just not recovered from the workout it had. And the amount of time I have to work out is much more constrained. So it's like I'm doing super intense, 30-minute workouts. Like, I'll start with an all-out 5-minute sprint type thing and then just like drag myself from there. I will say, I don't think I've actually felt like a huge decline in my physical health. I think it's sort of this interesting experiment of, well, did I really need to work out 6 times a week? Or is this actually a more effective way of working out? That, or I am just slowly declining into dad bod, and I haven't, I'm looking in the mirror every day and it's such a small decrement, then I'm going to wake up 2 years from now and it's all going to be over.
I was waiting for you to say I do these super intense, like hit 5 to 8 minute workouts, but you're like super intense 30-minute workouts.
Well, for me, that's 30 minutes every other day is way less than I used to do.
Well, I don't know how this got in like my YouTube feed, but have you seen the stuff with like Dorian Yates talking about just, one set to and then like rest and recover for like 3 to 7 days? It's almost like the body by science stuff is like, yeah. But when one says to failure, his ability to go to failure is very different from everybody else's ability to push themselves to failure.
Well, I have heard about some of that, and I need to look into the science of, if you do one set till failure, it is like getting 90% of the work done. For like all the possible muscle benefits you could get in that muscle for that day. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I will tell you, if I jump on the rower and I do an all-out 1 minute or 5-minute row as fast as possible, and then I try to do a casual 20-minute row, those are the worst 20 minutes of my life. I mean, when you absolutely deplete yourself for the first minute to 5 minutes, it's like you get nothing left. This is, by the way, Pirates of Finance, where we talk about everything but markets. We're all over the place today, Jason.
Well, I'm gonna just keep going. Like that Arnold documentary that I brought up is awesome. That 3-part Arnold documentary reminds me of the Bill Burr bit about Arnold's a great man.
But you brought up Arnold and you brought up Conan. I had not seen Conan in my life, which is surprising, being the big fantasy nerd I am. You would think, but for somehow I just never saw Conan. So last year, I think my wife was out, and I said, you know what? I'm going to sit down and watch Conan. I got to tell you, that movie was horrible.
I was going to ask you that.
That movie was horrible. The plot didn't make sense. The characters didn't make sense. They had zero motivation. I had zero attachment to any of them. The effects were awful. The fight choreography was awful. Who in the world? How did that become such a cult hit?
Was it like the 80s though, too? Like early 80s? Maybe
yes,
no, maybe late 80s.
I'm
early
not
90s.
Using that as justification for how shitty that movie was.
But you strike me as more of a Beastmaster guy anyway.
So I think all that stuff was like right before I was coming up. I was heavy Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That was my youth.
There you go. The other thing that I always find fascinating that they thankfully brought up in this series, and by the way, I think it's produced by Arnold, so you can imagine it must be nice when you produce your own, biopic.
Yeah.
Is he was actually like a millionaire, multimillionaire off of real estate before he even got into like anything and started even making money off of bodybuilding and anything else. Him and like Franco were like, they started off doing construction and then started, flipping houses and then getting into commercial buildings. And it was during the 70s and, the interest rates, spike and decline. And like, he was actually crushing it in commercial real estate before he made any money off of movies or anything like that.
Yep. The other sort of funny story, so he was living in Venice Beach, California, and he was doing construction with Franco Colombo. And they were, he was telling one story about how their job was to basically like smash glass bottles and put the glass shards in this cement on top of walls to help prevent people from like climbing over walls. And I was like, what an absolutely insane concept. Like, like we're just putting smashed glass on the top of walls to prevent people from breaking into. But that was his job.
No, I remember that story. But also, almost this going back to your mentorship thing. This is interesting to me. Is like Arnold, and I think Bert Kreischer was talking about this recently, but like everybody talks about it with Arnold, is like he is one of those celebrities that like when you see him, like he makes everybody feel like a celebrity around him. Like he turns that charm on and that shines that light on other people and makes it about them and not about him. And like he's talking about even the documentary, he's like, all these other actors think they're artists. And as soon as the film's done, they like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm an artist. He's like, the film's only half of it. The other half is marketing and branding and getting the word out. It's like the guy just understands life.
Yes. He does. And I think it's sort of probably from the fact that he's had these multiple careers, right? I mean, look, you look at even like his time as governor of California, which you sort of go like, what a ridiculous concept. But he's like an amazingly centrist Republican, right? Someone who's also like changed his views on things over time in a refreshing way. He just came out and talked about how some of his past behavior towards women was wildly inappropriate, and he apologized for it. It's like this doesn't happen. And maybe it's just because like he can't have a further political career, right? You know, normally people are trying to use governor as a stepping stone towards the presidency or something like that. But when you know you can't be president and you're stuck being governor, well, maybe you just do that one job as best you can to the way you think it should be done rather than doing it to the politics.
Well, this has also come up on All In podcast with Chamath. Is like, what do you think? Like, you know, the idea that you had to be a natural born American to be president is just a throwback to a time. Like, if we think about what's the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio in New York City, like with the 5 points.
Great movie.
Yeah, but like how Gangs in New York, like it was really about like native borns versus immigrants and all that stuff. Like this is a throwback to that time. Like when are we going to come around to like, if these people can run for other political offices, why can't they be president of the United States?
Well, I think it's is it about managing the tail risk of like someone's an agent of another country? Like you need that
Manchurian candidate kind of thing.
Yeah. I don't know.
But at the same time, like remember when JFK? Well, we don't remember. We weren't born. But like when JFK was running for president, he was going to be the first Catholic president, and nobody wanted a Catholic president because they thought they'd take their directions from the Pope. Like we have a lot of stupid ideas, right?
We're human beings. Pretty much everything we do is stupid.
But also, when you're talking about, man, by the way, you nailed everything about Arnold without seeing the documentary. I mean, you had a lot of like intimate inside stories. I mean, that was really good on everything you did. But also,
I don't know what to tell you. I think Arnold's great. Plus I had this weird bodybuilding phase when I was younger.
Yeah.
You know, you can't go through like some interest in bodybuilding without being hyped on Arnold.
What I mean, and like you said, I'm not into bodybuilding, but I've seen Pumping Iron multiple times. What's the greatest line from Pumping Iron?
I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say what
I knew you wanted to say the coming thing, but that's not for me. To me is when somebody's asking him like, how much milk do you drink and everything, he's like, milk is for babies.
That's my favorite part. I just know what shirt I want to get is when after he wins the title and he's lying there with the fried chicken. He's got this shirt on that says like Arnold is numero uno.
Yeah.
Oh, what a great shirt. What is just a classic dude. Like talk about a life lived fully. And you know he's not done living life, but like to the point of having those multiple careers, doing these multiple things, like reinventing yourself, staying relevant. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, as I'm sure you even know, as like even the reason we have like the Hummer as a residential like personal vehicle is because of him. Like there's so many random things like that. And like he was talking about like smoking cigars like in places you shouldn't. He's like, that's just my personality. But like I think I brought it up earlier, but we might have stepped over it, is like the Bill Burr bit about Arnold being a great man. And like everybody should go out and Google that one on YouTube and everything. But it's basically like, okay, you're telling me he's not a great man. He's like, who in this world can get famous for lifting weights? Right. Then go from Austria to America. So you immigrate to another country, you get famous for lifting weights. Then you want to become like the world's biggest movie actor. Right. Like, and then you want to marry into our royalty by marrying a Kennedy. And he's like, then what's next, Arnold? I'm going to run for governor of a state I can't even pronounce. Like, get the fuck out of here. It's like, you're telling me Arnold's not a great man. But then he goes, anybody to have sex with his nanny, which was a layup. So like, that's what it like goes into this whole bit. It's just ridiculous.
There's a great story, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but about, I guess, when Arnold was filming Terminator, he said to James Cameron that the line, "I'll be back," right? His most famous line ever. I guess he said to James Cameron, I don't think that should be the line.
Right.
Like, I'm a machine. I would say, I will be back. And, and James Cameron was basically like, shut the fuck up. Like, there's a reason you're the actor.
Dude,
And,
by the way, Tyler and I have a private chat going on. We do not believe that you haven't seen this documentary with everything, like even bringing up that one. There's no way you haven't seen this documentary.
I haven't seen it, I promise.
Man, you're knowledge.
You're making me sound Arnold obsessed though. But exactly. You know, he's a cool dude.
No, my brother-in-law like knows all that stuff too. It's great. I'll take it back to finance for a second. I'm not saying I'm pursuing this, but I've had some interesting conversations in the last few weeks about seeding relationships when you're trying to launch funds. Have you ever even thought about that or pursued that, or is that an affectation of people that actually worked at large hedge funds and investment banks where you could even have a seeding relationship? Has that always been out of your mind for like, and just for those who don't know, like sometimes people, you know, to launch a fund to get on platforms, sometimes you need $100 million minimum. And there's a seeding relationship where somebody will provide you with that $100 million for a portion of like the economics of that fund, whether while the money's in there or potentially in perpetuity or even a GP stake. It used to be a bigger thing, you know, a decade ago, but it's still potentially viable. But I don't think you or I kind of have the relationship or clout for like seeding deals.
So you have to be very careful with this, actually.
Okay.
So let's say you want to launch a mutual fund. I'm just going to use a mutual fund as an example. And you say to someone, if you put $100 million, you know, you're an advisor, you put $100 million of your client's money in, and we're going to give you a kickback. Or actually, let's make it cleaner because that's obviously a conflict of interest. Like, let's say it's a family office. Put $100 million into the fund, and we're going to give you a share of the fund's profit. There is actually a potential conflict of interest there where you are creating a unique share class to that person, and you can't do that legally. So what you have seen in certain cases, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I just know there are inherent risks here, is that you've seen people start hedge funds, and then the hedge fund owns part of the ETF. And so it's not just getting the kickback. It actually took the economic risk in helping pay for the ETF or the mutual fund startup costs, is an owner of the vehicle. But then there's also capital within the hedge fund that's being used to help seed the vehicle. So that is not necessarily creating a second share class because they took the economic risk of the fund owns part of the GP. So that can be done. But it also has to be done in one transaction. It's interesting that, I think one well-known example of this recently is Bob Unlimited on Twitter. His ETF, this is basically how he got it off the ground. He used his institutional relationships to create a hedge fund. That hedge fund became an owner in the ETF, and people who wanted to own the ETF put money into the hedge fund, which was then used to buy the ETF. The way it was explained is these were people who were going to be allocators anyway, so they didn't mind. But you can do it in a way where you say, look, you allocate, and actually the hedge fund will hedge out the exposure, like take the exact opposite positions that are held in the ETF, and then you're just sort of getting, you know, the long carry on the ETF itself. So it's definitely possible. I have spoken to folks about it. It's not easy though. You know, you got to be willing to give up those economics. They need to be willing to take the risk. And I think you're more likely to find that in family office relationships than you are in, say, like with advisors. That would be very difficult, except for ultra high net worth. And when you start talking to institutions, that's not really opportunities they're generally looking for. So it's like a family office opportunity only, at least in my experience.
But just to clarify, two questions. One, just to clarify, going back to the original example where you say you can't create like almost like a separate share class for that to get that quote unquote kickback interest, is like, but you can sell those people like a GP interest in your fund, and that's how they can participate in the economics. That's
as long as it's not a quid pro quo. right?
Right. They don't have to put the money in. Yeah.
If they put the money in and then I give them a GP interest, right? That doesn't look very good. Like they have to be totally distinct and separate economic transactions, and their ability to own part of the GP can't be dependent upon them putting the money in. And again, this is my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, so someone else may know better than I do.
And then no shade, good for Bob, but correct me if I'm wrong. Bob worked at Bridgewater, so it's nice to have those relationships, huh?
Yeah, Bob worked at, but that's for better and worse, right? So Bob gets it off the ground very quickly, but Bob, his experience at Bridgewater doesn't mean he has any knowledge about how to raise money among the RIA distribution channel, right? So we can say good for Bob. He's able to tap into some family offices and maybe get some early seed, but he may have no idea how to navigate the gatekeepers at LPL and Raymond James, and right there, it's a whole different world. And so, we'll see. He came out of the gate with a decent amount of AUM. I don't think it's grown significantly since then. So, but we'll see how it goes. It's still early days.
So, I'm in Chicago this week. We're doing a company offsite. We're actually going to Cubbies game later this week, so I'm excited for that, to head over to Wrigley Field. I would argue, and I've been arguing for years, that Chicago is the greatest of the larger American urban cities where you can live that public transportation, urban life, and still raise a family. It is unbelievable to watch my friends here, how like their kids are in softball and baseball, but they can like walk to the ballpark down the street from their house, still be, 10 minutes from the Loop in the city center, take their kids, like we've talked about the past, like how the bars are set up for kids, or even like all the sports games behind the glass, they have a bar for the dads. And, like, it's just ridiculous. I just don't think there's any city quite like this left where you can raise a family in a very urban environment. Do you have any thoughts? Like all the other ones, like a lot of the other cities sprawl out, so it is a little bit easier. But like it's pretty tough to raise a family in like New York or downtown San Francisco,
like
where
a
like
true
Chicago's,
urban environment.
Yeah, true urban environment. That's what I'm saying. Like Chicago, they don't realize how good they have it here.
Yeah, I don't know what the cost of living in Chicago is for a true urban environment. Like when I think of true urban, I'm like, you are pretty downtown, whether you're Boston or New York. Yeah, those are incredibly expensive places to live. There's incredible demand for that property, and trying to have enough room for your average family of two parents and two children and a pet. Like, yeah, you need a decent amount of room, and that cost per square foot is very high. I do know a significant number of people who live in the suburbs of Chicago, right, and they get the benefits of that near urban living, but I don't think that's hugely different than the suburbs of Boston.
Yeah, because you guys have the train commutes. Shout out to trains once again. It's all about those bedroom communities, be able to ride the train into the city. That's what I'm talking about. Like that's more rare than people realize. The second part of it is it's amazing once again on how much Gelman amnesia, or we got maybe there's a different word for this, is how much people are always talking about the violence of American cities now and crime and everything. It's like whenever, like I'm here in Chicago, they're like talking about the crime downtown, or they go, but then they're like, oh, you're by San Francisco? I don't even, like, that place is dead and gone. Like it's never going to come back. And I'm like, have you been there? No. Okay, we'll just make this up. Or like they're like, downtown Chicago is terrible. I was like, when the last time you went downtown? I haven't been there since pre-COVID. It's just like, it's just crazy to me how people just regurgitate headlines on news, and they have like, not that your subjective anecdotal experience is any better, but it's just been interesting as I travel how everybody's like talking about that next city over and how violent and crime ridden it is.
Yeah, I can't speak to a huge swath of the cities in the United States, but I will say I don't think I've ever been downtown Chicago, Boston, New York, even when I was in San Francisco last, which was pre-COVID, like LA, I've always felt very safe. Now I have mostly kept to the business districts, which are generally kept pretty safe. So you gotta consider where you're going. It helps that I'm a large male, so I don't tend to get targeted for things, right? Like I'm gonna feel a different degree of safety than my wife might walking around the same areas. But yeah, I think a lot of this is overblown for people who wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable in that environment anyway. Like my parents who didn't grow up in a city feel much less comfortable in cities than I do. They would point at stuff and say, Corey Large Male Hofstein. Thank you, Tyler, for that Chiron or whatever that's called. Yeah, but like, my parents are gonna make a bigger deal out of certain things in a city. Like homeless population for them is very off-putting. Whereas, I lived in Boston for a decade, and it's like, oh, that's just part of city living, right? You
lived in like Venice too, which is definitely part of city living.
Like you just learn to navigate it, and I think when you're around it enough, you're less like worried about it. Now that said, like there's still plenty of violence within cities, but again, I think this stuff often gets reported and it's more sensational than it really is.
Well, and like you just said, I think the key is, like you said, you are aware of your surroundings. You're not out in fringe areas of cities at 3:00 in the morning, just walking around, looking at your phone or anything like that. So that's part of it. Like I remember, like, when I was younger and I used to travel around the world, people always freak out, like, oh my God, you're in Turkey. Like, aren't you scared and everything? I'm like, did you like go on a trip to Napa? Like, do you know what surrounds there? Like the East Bay, there's parts of the East Bay you'd never go to, but like, you don't go there. Like, so it's just like, it's interesting how people always look at those things. There was a great book about a guy who walked around the world in the 1970s, and every town he came to, they would say, be careful in the next town because they're a bunch of thieves and murderers and they're gonna like rob you and kill you. And every single town he went to, walk in,
the otherisms of them. Yeah, that's human nature. That's human nature. Well, Jason, we have somehow twiddled our thumbs through an hour here.
But by the way, do you know? Here's the teaser. Do you even know where I'm going to be next week?
Do I know where you're going to be next week?
In the world.
Is it out of the?
Where in the world is Carmen San Diego?
Is it out?
I don't know. No, I'm going to leave it there because I don't even think you know. So it'll be a surprise.
I think you told me, but I'll find out from your background or lack of background. It'll look like just every other generic office building.
Are you kidding me? RCM has beautiful offices. How dare you denigrate RCM Alternatives offices?
You don't have anything fun on
How
the TV
dare you, sir? Time. How dare you, sir? Well, that's why our editor can put up whatever they want on said TV.
That's right. That's where the Liquid Death promotion will go.
Exactly. I'm trying.
Well, everyone, we appreciate you tuning in. Again, this has been one of our summer episodes where it's Where in the World is Jason Buck. We're having to record these at really random days, very frequently, like with little heads up. But we're having fun. We're kicking it out. And again, we hope you will fulfill your side of the Pirate Pinky promise. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, leave some inflammatory comments on Twitter and YouTube. Let us know what you want to hear us chat about. We missed the live booty crew. So leave those comments. We're checking in. We're listening. And have yourself a wonderful summer.
For your first time pirates, that beautiful baritone next to me is Corey Large Male Hofstein. Tyler, take us out.